As a method of proceeding, we'll take up kind of a sketch by way of categories. The first being music. When I was about 6 years old, I began piano lessons. I think it was primarily to give me something to do before I got into school. But I had an irregular pattern of lessons and often skipped summers, so I only progressed to the third book of Johnson. But by the time I was 10, I had a silver cornet. And as noted, Mr. Phelan was the callous director of the local band, and he was my teacher, so I got into that pretty early. The silver cornet was kind of sluggish, always had slow valves, had to be carefully lubricated. And about that same time I did some singing in the church and school choirs, choruses, and I played the organ for the Vacation Bible School. Very simply performed, but nonetheless. When I was 13, I had a job as the camp bugler for the Boy Scout camp at Mount Roosevelt, or Camp Roosevelt, up near Bangor, Maine. Dad and I often would sing together along with records we'd buy. When I was about 14, in the Miami High band, there were too many cornets and trumpets, and in order to get into the marching band, I took up the baritone, which has the same fingering but played much lower tones. This got me into the band community and the fellowship of many band trips where we'd go in competitions all over Florida and even into southeastern competitions where we were always winners. Our band director was very rigid, demanding, but he got the results. We had 144 marching band members that performed in the Orange Bowl parade and then at the halftime at the Orange Bowl in Miami. When I was 16, in my senior year, I was given a decent cornet. It was a lovely one. It was called a Kong Coprion. And there I improved dramatically. The reputation of the high school band was such that if you were in a first chair position as you graduated, which I was, you were provided with an opportunity to accept a musical scholarship at the University of Miami. You had to study music, and I was going to be a pre-med, so this was not something I accepted. When I was 17, entering Dartmouth College, I went for the band audition, and the band director, learning that I had been in the Miami Senior High School band for 3 years, made my audition almost a routine, because the fact that I had been involved in so many drills, he placed me as an assistant manager to work out the drills for the Dartmouth band. This was always fun, and the following year I joined a fraternity, and we were in the so-called hum contest with other fraternities in a competition. I also sang in some other singing groups. We had 3 or 4 of us that would sing together for fraternity parties, and mostly in our own fraternity, the Sigma Phi Epsilon, but we did get invitations elsewhere. When I was about 19, I had a new trumpet, and the Concoprian cornet had been stolen at the Dartmouth band building, and with the insurance plus a little more, Dad was able to get me a new trumpet. It was easier to play, and I improved some more and actually became president of the Dartmouth College Band in my junior year. This led to me being a Green Key member, and I was a guest conductor of the Lehigh Marching Band when they came. During my presidency, we also created the first long-playing record of the Dartmouth Band. The band put on a band night at Dartmouth, and there I was able to do some jokes from the stage and just kind of ramble on and sounding like a Mainer. I learned that I could do that accent pretty easily and use that for jokes. When I told Dad about this, he commented that anybody that talked that much was bound to say something funny once in a while. When I got to Yale Medical School, we formed a medical octet, and ran that for a couple of years. And we were even invited down to one of the local restaurants on the shore of New Haven to perform. Then, years later, in Hampton, I was a founding member and president of Hampton Community Players. We started this primarily to increase the role of our children, because there was no, what would you say, there was no high school component where they could do a play or a musical. And we did a play in the fall and a musical in the spring each year for 10 years, with increasing roles for the kids as they matured. Court had one of the starring roles in a Gilbert and Sullivan performance. I had given my trumpet to Court, and he had played that during high school. In later years, many later, I loaned it also to my step-grandson, Clayton. When I was about 43, I began doing parts in the hospital benefits that were done every other year, and had a lot of fun with different roles in that regard. Singing numbers that were parodies on other more legitimate musical productions. When I retired to Florida, the first 10 years I didn't do much musically, but then we moved to Windermere, and they had follies every other year, and for about 10 years, from age 68 on, I did that, and got a chance to sing with the chorus and also a few solo performances. The Congregational Church in Naples has an unusually strong choir, but I delight in the fact that the congregation is also very strong. So we have beautiful music every service. Let's shift into scouting history. I was a Cub Scout when I was 9. My mother was a den mother. I had wolf and bear. Then I dropped out while we were in Florida. At age 12, I became a Boy Scout. As I noted earlier, Dad was on the board of directors. I went my first summer to Camp Roosevelt, the scout camp mentioned above. Had my first exposure. Interestingly, my older cousins, Carl and Forrest, had been so homesick they had to go back, be picked up short of their completed time at the camp. This drove me to ignore my being homesick, which I was, but still I had to stick it out, and I did. And as noted, the next year I was a camp bugler. By the time I was 16, I had advanced through the different levels of scouting and had become a junior assistant scoutmaster, and was a winner of the Eagle Scout Award. I was the first Eagle Scout in the county for 25 years, and the governor of Maine sent his assistant, and he and my mother pinned on my Eagle badge. Shifting to another category of church, we were raised Episcopal. My grandparents, on my dad's side, had been Lutheran in Denmark, and the Episcopal was the closest thing that they found when they came over here. My mother had been a Southern Baptist, but she joined the Episcopal when she married Dad. But she continued to sing happy hymns that were not in our Episcopal hymnal, and I later sought out some Baptist components in my church exposure, starting looking just for the music, which was always so much lighter and more fun. In college, I had the challenges that I mentioned earlier with Father Hodder, and he later married us, and even the old Dean Syvertson came to my ceremony. He told my folks that they had tried to get me to stay at Dartmouth Med School, which was nice of him to say. Having gone to Yale, in med school, time constraints resulted in only occasional attendance at church. The same continued on through residency. During my military payback years, I went to ecumenical services and began some serious Bible scholarship study with the help of a commentary and one of the Protestant ministers. I learned some Hebrew and some Greek, and just enough to help me with looking at some of the original books of the Bible, and some of the words were interesting, such as the Virgin Mary. The word virgin really meant just a very fine young woman, and Adam really just meant a man. There were things like that that were educationally interesting, but they were not devotional. When I got out of the service and lived in Hampton, Connecticut, we searched a number of different Episcopal churches in the area, none in Hampton, and eventually came back to the Congregational Church in Hampton because of its proximity and the need for our children to recognize that there were other children in their classes that were also going to church. In Hampton, I took on multiple duties. It being a small church, I taught adult education courses and was active in the deaconry and became a senior deacon. My exposure to the Baptist church was usually just midweek, but I became very active in that regard and was a guest speaker occasionally with the Baptist and with the Businessmen's Breakfast. The Basic Youth Conflicts Conference was important, which I helped to fund in those days when I had an income. And the support was offered, but no real benefit to my wife, Dorothy, when she became depressed and very difficult to be with. The Baptist folks offered counseling, which we both tried, but as I noted, that didn't go anywhere. After about 6 years and 12 different counselors that we tried, these lasted only a few months before Dot would become disillusioned with their efforts and fire them. I went to talk with our pastor, and the idea that divorce would be the healthiest solution began to clarify in my mind. Pastor Muth found scriptural basis for this, and as well as Pastor Marsden. And then it still took me another year and a half to clarify my own mind that I'd done everything possible. And then after the divorce, about a year and a half later, I remarried to Syl. She had what I really needed in a very buoyant personality and upbeat about most everything. I had moved to Storrs, Connecticut, and was a member of the Congregational Church there. So after a year, we were married there, when the Catholic and Episcopal churches in Pomfret and Putnam and the Baptist one in Eastford all had some slight reluctance. But as I noted, Pastor Philip Muth counseled us, and he and Peter Marsden performed the marriage ceremony with all our combined 7 children participating. Now, with over 31 years of very blessed happiness together, we've found our marriage to be very blessed and unbelievably easy. I avoided the offices in this Storrs Church, and then after retirement, at the end of 1988, to the Naples Congregational Church, University of Correction, they called it the United Church of Christ. We both found service in the thrift shop, the bargain box, and Phil's even more involved in management than I. I preferred to be a simple volunteer, ready to help in most areas, but with no management requirements. I had enough of that in practice and in my Hampton church experiences. Now slipping into another category of sports. Boating seemed to be something I was born into. I'm told I was wedged into the bow of my dad's canoe before I could really walk. I became a canoeing instructor in the Scouts and at summer camp jobs. Sailing began in an old rowboat that had been built for my sister in a very heavy style, and my dad and I eventually made a thwart for holding the mast and rigged up a rough rudder and tiller arrangement. Then when I was a camp counselor in Waterfront, I was often invited to go along on sailing excursions on Lake Winnipesaukee, as I had invited the sailing instructor on our canoeing trips as a counselor. This way I learned a lot more about sailing and racing. And when I was in my residency in UCLA, we lived near the southern end of Los Angeles in Redondo Beach, and we were close to the harbor in San Diego, this correction in Los Angeles. And I bought a Falcon 17, which was a centerboard, and I wedged my boys into the bow of that boat. I became a power squadron member and took several courses, including the basic, followed by sail and advanced sail. When I was stationed in Homestead, Florida, we went looking for a sailboat before we even had housing. And we bought a 26-foot Luder 16 before we were out of the motel. I had sail bags under the beds. It was a beautiful little boat, and the previous owner said it was primarily a racing boat, that I really should race it. And that would make me eligible for membership in the Coconut Grove Sailing Club. Well, with his helping me on the first race and routing me to the library in Coconut Grove, where there were all kinds of books on tactics and racing techniques, I did very well and won 3 different trophies. Dot was my bow man, and Jim Silver was a great crew in the cockpit. The 3 of us practiced when we weren't racing and became very proficient. A few years later, after I was no longer stationed there, I came back to visit my folks, and we went down to rent a sailboat and ran into one of the previous members of the Coconut Grove Sailing Club, and he said that there was no worry about us taking a boat out, as my parents were transporting us around. He spoke to them about that. When I got into civilian life, beginning in '66, I bought an L.L. Bean aluminum canoe, and the boys and I used that a good deal. And then we bought a Dyer Dow, which is a sailing dinghy, about 8 feet long. And then beginning the next year, we began to charter larger and larger sailboats as our family got larger, and we would also arrange to have guests on board, sometimes overnight, and then as the boys got older, they would have a friend come along for the whole week or 2. And so did Xanthi. So Court, Greg, and Xanthi were my primary crew. In the early days, Dot would also be an important part of the summer charters, but as the Depression got to be a bigger problem, she dropped out. In later years, after my remarriage, we continued this chartering process until 1982, when we bought a 30-foot S2 sailboat, which was a 9.2 centerboard, center cockpit, a full keel. Bought it new in Essex, Connecticut. Then after a couple of years, we moved up to the East Greenwich Yacht Club with the Norton's Marina the first year, and then moving over to the club later. I've been a member of the yacht club there since 1985. Austin and Kitty Hogan sponsored us, and we had many wonderful sails over the next 30 years. The boat is still our pleasure to own, and this is dictated in 2011. There are many stories that I may go back to later of the would-be problems that went with sailing. I think Court may have recorded some of my comments in that regard. Back to another sport. I tried a little boxing because Dad had a boxing bag for training when he was young, and he retrieved it from the family and hung it up in our garage. Taught me some bag skills, but warned me against any real boxing, saying that there's always going to be somebody better and you don't want to beat your head up. In baseball, I had the misfortune of catching a ball on the end of a finger that put me out of commission for a year, so I was a little bit late in starting, and it wasn't until my junior year that I got onto the varsity. I was never a great star, but they did use me for pitching a batting practice. Basketball, I never did make varsity, but this was related to the fact that there was no real instruction. The focus was on the boys that were playing competitively on the varsity, and those of us that were backup were never taught anything that we couldn't pick up on our own. This led to considerable mediocrity on my part, but I still tried and even played a bit of intramurals in college. There I had broken my nose in a college game, and a double offense was they called me for blocking when I'm sure the opponent was charging. Well, that took away some interest in that sport, and I move over to another one now, golf. I had two cousins that lived next to the golf course in Calais, Maine, and they were caddying when they were youngsters and playing as well. And they got me interested. And my folks bought me some Sears Roebuck's clubs, and I began to play, and I had some natural ability in that area. It always seemed that any sport I tried, everybody be impressed with my initial performance, but then I'd reach a plateau. This happened in college. I continued to play through high school and thought I might even try out for the Dartmouth College team. So I was there early enough to work the practice sessions in and play at the Dartmouth College golf course a good deal, and got down into the low 80s. Thought that was pretty good, but then I discovered that the people on the team were in the low 70s, so I didn't bother to try out for that team. But I had a lot of fun with it. Continued playing even in med school. Go to the Yale course and have a respite from the constant studying. I played when I was in the military and would go to medical meetings where the afternoons were free for golf, and this continued to be a pleasant pastime. But when I was a civilian again, my boys were getting older and I needed to be with them more, and we changed over to tennis. We had a school librarian at the high school, Joe Muldoon, who had been an instructor in tennis, and I got him to teach my boys and myself as well. The minister, Pete Marsden, had been one of my golfing friends, and we both needed more time than golf would allow us. Taking up the whole day on a weekend was not something good for family support, so we dropped that, and with Joe Muldoon and another friend of his playing a good level of tennis, they took us on to teach us doubles. And from that, I did progress and